I'm sorry. Do we have any citizens in the out there in the ether that would like to make public comment? If so, please use your raise hand function. I can't see that far. Oh, Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Hello. Sorry about that.
You can hear me, I guess.
You bet.
Okay, I've got a molehill and a mountain for you. Molehill is the irritating habit of council and council committee of not providing copies of documents to citizens when they're going to be discussed. I've raised this question before. Most recent example is most recent meeting, Budget and Finance. You discussed monthly reports, but the monthly reports weren't available for citizens. So I'd suggest an addition in that vein so that citizens can be more than historians and actually be participants. But my mountain comes from Wild Bill Douglas, my favorite Supreme Court justice. This is from 1972. He's in dissent again with his brother Blackmun. The critical question of standing would be simplified and put neatly in focus if we fashioned a federal rule that allowed environmental issues to be litigated before federal agencies or federal courts in the name of the inanimate object about to be despoiled, defaced, or invaded by roads, bulldozers, and where injury is the subject of public outrage. Contemporary public concern for protecting nature's ecological equilibrium should lead to the conferral of standing upon environmental objects to sue for their own preservation. Inanimate objects are sometimes parties in litigation. A ship has legal personality. The corporation's soul, for the purpose of protecting religious organizations, is an acceptable adversary. The ordinary corporation is a person for many purposes. So it should be as respects valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland, or even air that feels the destructive pressures of modern technology and modern life. The river, for example, is the living symbol of all the life it sustains or nourishes. Fish, aquatic insects, water ouzels, otter, fish, deer, elk, bear, all the other animals, including man, who are dependent on it and who enjoy it for its sight, its sound, or its life. The river as plaintiff speaks for the ecological unit of life that is part of it. And he goes on, of course, this is a legal opinion, so there are pages more, but this is one of the earliest portrayals at this level of the rights of nature as a legal forecast, as a legal doctrine. And this doctrine is finding place in jurisdictions and in courts in this country and others. And I think it should be incorporated in some constructive way into the practices and the codes of Lake Forest Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Appreciate your comments. I remember those words very well, and sage advice. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to make comment at this time? I think we're good. Thank you. With that, we'll close public comment. And at this point, we're going to talk about governance manual provisions. And I apologize to everyone. We have a bit of a audio issue here. So it's a little, hopefully those members who are listening to us out there on the internet are not subjected to the challenges that we are. I'm not sure what's going on here. So with that, colleagues, I wanted to kick us off with thanking my colleagues, Mr. Goldberg and Vice Chair Cassover, for contributing a really serious amount of thoughtful edits to the governance manual, which has not been edited since, if you can believe this, Philippa, 2016. It's quite extraordinary. And we've always said this document is a living, breathing document, and there's a lot of things in here that we need to be considering going forward. And I want to say at the outset that when you see the red lines and everything else, one of the challenges we had with trying to merge the work that myself and my two colleagues did on this particular topic, Microsoft Word did not like us very much. And I spent the better part of 3 hours trying to reconcile how to make this so we could get the edits in place. And I apologize to Vice Chair Cassover because her introduction was omitted. And I would like her, if she would be so amenable, to introduce her introduction to this, because that needs to be added to the mix because it somehow got deleted inadvertently.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm one of those people that believes you should have a purpose statement at the beginning of any document or ordinance or, to do with the city. So I wrote this, and let me know what you think. The purpose of this governance manual is to provide structure and guidance to the City Council and administration and transparency to the citizens. The manual identifies the duties and roles played by elected council members, senior administrators, and citizen volunteers. The manual sets the expectations for civil conduct and clarifies the rules for council meetings. The governance manual should be reviewed regularly and updated to adapt to changing circumstances.
Thank you very much. I think that's excellent. Colleagues, thoughts on the introduction? I think definitively we should include that in the mix.
And I'm sorry it's not in the document. I'd be glad to copy that and just email it to everybody so you can have it in writing.
You bet. Thank you. Let's do that. And I think what I need to do is create a clean copy without edits, depending on what the council decides at this time or this evening, and then that way we can introduce some things into the mix. Yes, please.
I believe it is. I believe I wanted you to turn on this, please.
Oh, go ahead.
It's in the document that I received from you today, but
Oh.
it's deleted. So if you turn on show all comments, it'll show you it during the deletion.
Well, there you go.
And I just rejected the deletion in Word, so it shows up for me now.
Oh,
So
Okay.
for those that are interested following along digitally, you can resurrect it.
Yeah,
if you
because
would.
I have it here too as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
So
and
thank you.
thank you. I'm looking at the paper copy.
Yeah, the paper
Yeah,
copy.
paper
does
copy
not.
didn't have it.
Thank you very
The
much.
digital
Sarah.
does.
That's very helpful. And by the way, I mean, again, this is the first touch on this, and we're going to be considering this a couple of times before we move forward. And again, it is my intention, and you may guide me if I'm going in the wrong direction, but I really feel as though we can't get too far into the weeds here, although I think the three of us actually did, which is great, because it needed a deep dive. But let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the very good. So and I apologize for not getting this to you sooner. It's just that there's a lot involved, so you can imagine the edits. And what I'd like to do from here is to start out going through just basically starting at the beginning, if we can. And unless there's some overriding policy or theme that you want to make sure that's highlighted here, start out with going through the beginning and walk through some of the changes that were recommended by my colleagues and myself. So starting at the beginning, Article 1, Principles of Government. Let's see here. Seems really dark in here. There's a deletion there under the judicial branch. I think Mr. Scroll down a little bit, Matt, if you could, please. There we go. Thank you so much. The corrected, actually the same revised code of Washington. So we're good there. Let's go on to the next page. Legislative branch. Same, I think it's the same thing. For some reason, it seems to be 35A. For some reason, it seems to be striking the RCWs for some reason. Let's ignore that for a minute. Every single one of the RCWs is stricken and then reprinted. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't understand.
I don't know why that, it's probably the merge, and I tried to reconcile as much as I possibly could. Let's go to the meat of this. Down on service on regional bodies. Mr. Goldman had some great comments about service on regional bodies, and it's dark in here, it's hard to see.
Can we read it?
Council members, the stricken and the changed part is the revised part is council members and the mayor are encouraged to reach out to council leadership to express interest in serving on regional bodies. And Mr. Goldman, just for reference, I did not put a list of regional bodies because it evolves on a regular basis, and hard coding it, so to speak, in my vernacular is, but we always have a list going, so it makes sense. But thank you for the suggestion there. Any thoughts about that? Councilmember Riddle.
Sort of in this sort of thought of perhaps Councilmember Goldman, perhaps some examples so that folks who are coming to this new could understand what that looks like. SCA appointments, things like that, Sound Cities Association appointments, just so that there's some context for folks who are new to this document.
Sure.
Even though it wouldn't be hard coded per se, it would be examples.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Vice Chair Kossover.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had some conversation with folks who serve on other city councils, and one of the things that other cities do is to actually, in the fall, to have a meeting like probably at a cow, where the various bodies that are out there for regional service are discussed and identified as to what is of strategic importance to the city.
Ooh.
And which of those bodies really do we need to have representation on? And then discussion happens amongst the council to identify those who might be interested. And so I would actually propose that we, make some addition to what Larry has proposed there to actually make it more of a strategic kind of discussion and action. There are some of those committees that truly are important to Lake Forest Park. There are others not so much. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't really think about it that way.
You mentioned that before. Thank you very much, Philip. I think that's an excellent idea. It's the comparison between the musts and the nice to haves, right? And so would you be willing to craft some language around that? I would appreciate that very much. Mr. Goldman, please.
One of you has to turn.
Oh, sorry, there you go.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's especially important that we do this after an election has taken place. So say November 2020 or December 2023, when we know the composition of the incoming council, have the current members, the incoming members have a sit down and kind of go through and say, hey, these are some of the important boards that we would like to have representation on. So I remember coming in new, that was something that felt overwhelming to me, and that on top of getting used to being on council, realizing, oh, there's like all these acronyms and what do they mean, and
Sure.
it's
yeah,
it's a lot to take in all at once. So having that sort of prep meeting, I think, is a really good idea.
Fair enough. Could you turn off? Thank you, Phil. Yeah, thank you, Larry. Let's use first names here since we're committing the whole right now. That is very important, and we always try to think about going forward in election year, making sure there's proper transition and intellectual memory is carried forward and everything else. And I appreciate your thoughts about that. So I think it's really a very important point that you both have made. And if you wouldn't mind writing that language, and we can all talk about it at the next meeting. Any other thoughts on that, folks? John? Let's move on to the functioning of city council. Again, the RCW thing for some reason seems to be, I don't know why it did that. It's strange because it didn't do it in my markup copy here. Let's see. Email policy, there's nothing new here, some scriveners changes. And by the by, I just want to mention that the folks that wrote this back originally started in what 2013, I think. 14, it was adopted, but started in 2013. They did a fantastic job, and it's been edited a couple of times, but I think there's some issues for clarity that we need to look at in terms of organization of the topics at some point here down the line. So I just wanted to mention that as a bookmark. Let's go to Article 4, council meetings, and I believe that Mr. Goldman and sorry, I'm just going to say Philippa and Larry just had put in some thoughts about attendance in meetings and the 3-touch rule. Larry had particularly let's start with the 3-touch rule.
So
Did I miss something?
3.1
Yeah, there's a lot.
Did I miss?
on page 12.
There's a lot of.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
comments. I
Yeah,
apologize.
so importance of open public meetings. I don't understand why citizen commissions have been deleted out of this.
I don't know why that was deleted.
So can we add that back in, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure why that was deleted. And why is there RCW? This is deleted twice. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so
Hold on.
and then Larry has a comment there too, Larry, on 3.1, page 12.
Yeah, just I think that we kind of going with what Philippa said, having an introduction to the whole document, just having an introduction to the article, explaining why it's important. But nothing fancy.
Yeah. Hold on a second. Article 3. Yeah, I think it's a function of the merge. I apologize because this is stricken. It's not even stricken in my version. So I appreciate your attention to this, everybody. And please be aware that it may be the process of the merge of the 3 documents together, because that was inadvertent.
And it appears, going back to the original, that and the citizen commissions must have been an ad in one of your edits, because it does not appear in my April 28th, 2016 document. So I believe that was an ad in one, and then maybe it was deleted when the new one was put in. So
Yeah,
I'd like
'cause
to
it's not in
make that
here
clear.
either.
It's an ad from the original. And I
Well, we're all committed to making sure that the citizen commissions are part of the mix in that. There's
would
no question.
would we want to exempt the why am I forgetting the one, the citizen oversight commission for the police? That one's exempt, isn't it?
Not from the OPMA.
Okay,
The civil service.
the civil
Commission.
service,
No,
thank you.
you bet. Yeah. So, okay. Let me
But that
make
was-
sure that there's nothing that's been omitted here because of Word. My friends at Microsoft, I hate you. I'm sorry for that, but hours and hours of it crushing the documents. I should have done it manually. So, okay, commission. Add. Yeah, it's strange. It's not even here. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Is there anything else on Article 3?
What's going on with 3.5 there?
So in section 3.5, I've just tried to rewrite that to be a little bit more clear, because I had to read it the original a couple of times to fully understand what it was saying.
Oh, yes. I can barely read this. The Yes, the original language was the mayor will propose appointments to advisory committee boards and commissions. The mayor is the appointing authority and the council the confirming authority. The clearer language was revised to the mayor will propose appointments to advisory committees, boards and commissions. The council will then interview and choose to confirm those appointees, as opposed to, I mean, that was just riffing off of Mr. Goldman's original language.
Looks good to me.
There was an addition here on 3.6. In order to avoid the appearance of private discussions, city staff and elected officials shall refrain from using cell phones during public meetings. There was another version of that was included before, but it was in another place and it was deleted. Any thoughts about that?
Well, the use of cell phone, it's the use of cell phones to text, I think, as opposed to making phone calls that's at issue in that last sentence, right? Does that need to be made more clear?
Okay, I guess it was. That's true. Yeah, fair enough, Mayor. Yeah, there wasn't texting back in the day. So, oh, that's your comment, Larry. Shouldn't be texting. So if I'm using cell phones. What would you think for language there, Larry? You're parenthetically texting.
I'm fine with adding texting in particular, yeah.
And adding texting. Okay, plus texting. I will.
Would texting be part of the second sentence? Cell phone calls will be answered outside the council chambers and texting will not be allowed within the council chambers? Kind of thing,
Yeah.
just kind of put a blanket on texting.
Or I was thinking in the final sentence saying city staff and elected officials shall refrain from texting with cell phones during public meetings.
I think it's great. Could you send just forward that on?
Is that going to be obsolete soon and Snapchatting and WhatsApp? I mean, are we getting too detailed and not getting to the quality of the statement, which is simply that we don't want to have any communication amongst us to circumvent the open public meetings.
And for that, I think maybe just replace the word texting with communicating would be a catch-all for texting, Snapchatting, TikToking.
Who knows? Thank
Sure,
you. I would
communicating.
behind
Sure.
that. Staff is in the notes.
Would it be better for it to just be the elected officials?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Staff often
Yeah.
need to commute to work,
Sure.
to organize yourselves for,
Sure.
Sometimes to
City.
contact the attorney and things like that.
Electeds.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it
you
would
bet.
just be-
Thanks. Approach here and Oh, fair enough. Okay.
Committee of the whole.
The plural. is
Committee of the
on
whole
meetings, not-
meetings as,
Yes.
yeah, okay, there you go. Committee of the whole. Committee of the whole meetings. Let's clarify that. Because we have had that such circumstance before. My gosh, this is so small. I should have brought my glasses. Yeah, and again, Mr. Goldman, Larry highlighted that we need to make sure we are exemplifying through the governance manual, what are acceptable uses of the suspension of 3-10 rule. And so, you know, we don't want to abuse the privilege, so to speak. So do you want to speak to that, Larry, or am I capturing it enough?
Yeah, I think you basically summed it up, Tom, that when are we most likely to want to waive the 3-touch rule? For instance, this coming Thursday, we're going to want to waive it because there's a deadline for signing on to the opioid legal settlement. And so that's time sensitive. Or the other would be, this is a completely non-controversial contract and we might as well just get things moving. You know, there's really no need to have a second or a third meeting. There's really no other questions about it. So things like that.
Thank you very much. Summer, you had a comment? Question?
Yeah, I did. A comment, just perhaps be more general that that the touches are only count if it's an open public meeting of the council. I don't know if that makes any sense. If we have other kinds of committees or anything else like that, that might, you know, budget and finance committee might be considered a touch, especially during budget season when we're all members of the committee. So I'm just curious if we can again have sort of a at open public meetings that constitute the whole of the council, and then
Okay.
those could be touches, and that gives us some. We might. I don't know if we do.
We do. We actually do. Yeah, that's a great point, Summer. Thank you for bringing that up because thank you. I'm just ruminating here. Absolutely. So yes, I will make a note here to include language. The only place that would occur would be budget and finance.
The only other place, yeah.
Language RE, B and F. Okay, that makes sense because we've had that before when it comes to certain kind of fiscal policies that are time sensitive, not fiscal policies, but fiscal related matters that are time sensitive. So
I would like to be clear that I think presentations in executive session, that type of thing would not count towards a touch because it is not a publicly accessible touch. So I would want to make sure that our 3 touches are publicly accessible touches, basically. And I think that's the intent of.
It's mentioned here.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's under state statute as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we cannot consider discussion of something. We never make, for clarification, we never make decisions in executive or closed sessions. And so that is never considered something that is a deliberation by council.
And I
That's
think-
informative only.
Yeah, the language here almost implies it's excluded from application of the 3-touch rule. I mean, I think it would just be easier to say it's not considered a count of the 3-touch rule or something, you know, it's not considered one of the touches.
Yeah.
It almost implies that
It's better language than excluded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
it's just awkward.
we could let's tighten it up.
It's not easily accessible language, if I could put it that way.
Thank you for that. Okay.
And then generally speaking in 4.1, I think, can we say decision makers and the public? Because at the end, we also switch citizens to the public. And I think that includes, you know, folks who might be right over the border, but impacted by our work, who might want to come in and, you know, participate in our process.
Surprising council in the shade.
Who may not technically be a resident, but impacted by our work. They may want to be included in this.
Decision makers.
And I'd like to just make a comment on that too. As somebody who was not always a citizen of the United States, but an involved resident, yes, the the term citizen can be an exclusionary term. And so I think that it would be good to really just go through and put in either resident or public instead of that, wherever.
I think there may be some nuances that might be acknowledged.
I was just thinking in the beginning, we switched it up here, so maybe that
Okay,
can also be
consistency.
consistency of the public,
Sure.
where we use residents or
Okay.
citizens, just replace that with the public as a general rule. Unless we see some
bet.
odd reason where we shouldn't, but I appreciate that inclusion.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just always make clear too
course.
that I always was a legal resident.
I'm not quite following. I'm still thinking about decision makers. Aren't decision makers, because this refers to the city council meetings, to be council members? What other decision makers there are there for the council?
Yeah.
So why are we,
Residents or
no, but I mean,
public at large.
4.1 starts out with decision makers. Isn't that council members? Because this refers to council meetings, and are there anyone?
Again, the consistency there.
Oh.
We'll look at the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
But back to your first question, which I was thinking about decision makers, so I didn't follow the question you asked. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, we can go with that. Okay, I just want to make sure we're not. Again, this. Moving forward with things in a manner that allows the administration to do what they need to do. And the team, and we don't unduly hold them back because of the policy making.
Right.
You know, bad words. Simmer.
I know what we're getting at, and I agree completely with, I think, our belief of what this should say. Unnecessary seems a little too maybe open to interpretation. I know, I think we're thinking of it things for like the consent calendar, you know, where it's unnecessary to have a 3-touch on a consent calendar item. At least we agree to that when we approve the agenda. Essentially, that's a de facto agreement that we don't need the 3-touch rule on the consent calendar. So either perhaps add that language into our agenda at the consent calendars, that these items are considered, unless moved into business, are considered exempt from the 3-touch rule. So that way it's very clear. I just, unnecessary feels a little open-ended, and councils may interpret that more broadly with certain council compositions than other councils, you know, as we move into the future. So I would like us to think more on that and kind of maybe come back with some better definitions. I agree, the examples are correct. But yeah, anyways, those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Samara. And just a general reminder that this document arose more than a decade ago during let's just say a challenging time between the policymakers and the administration, and it was something that was very important to describe roles and make sure that people didn't overstep their bounds on both sides of the aisle. And aisle, I don't mean policy, I mean policy and administration. And so there's some relics of that, and I think it's really important to look at it in the spirit of how it was written. But at the same time, your point is well taken. We need to make sure that it is a document that's going to stand time going forward and not be a something that's overly prescriptive, that's going to tie somebody's hands that when we're all not here. I think that's really important. So thank you for that, Simra. Let's keep moving on here. Gosh, what's next here? Okay, city staff. This was, I think Larry, this was, I think it was your comment, number 11. You want to share with us 4.2?
Sure. Yeah, just trying to clarify that that's sort of an expectation, and we are already doing it, but just kind of putting it in writing that, oh, if it's a planning related issue, then Steve will talk about it, or if it's a project, then it might be Jeff or Andy. Just kind of that the expectation is there's going to be a staff member briefing us and answering questions.
Does that sit well with you, Mr. Mayor? Yeah, I mean, it's
what we do.
standard already, but it hasn't been delineated. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Oh, yes, Vice Chair.
And as I read this again, and I saw this when I first went through it, but I didn't note it. It says when sound system or other monitoring capabilities exist. Well, they do exist. So it's that's a bit redundant, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit old, it's a bit out of date, that language. So maybe we can rewrite that particular sentence, and I'll be happy to do that offline and send you something on that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was missing that. Yes. Thank you.
And then the next section, which is struck out again, it says, in order to enhance public understanding of complex issues being presented, city administration is encouraged to include use of visual communication tools where possible. I think we should leave that in. I don't know why it's been struck.
It's strange. It said, oh,
Yeah.
please. I'm sorry.
I kept the language. I just merged those two sections together since they seem to be essentially the same section.
Oh, right.
So
I see you have
moved
it.
that
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the end of 4.2.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
I get it.
Okay, so
I get it.
revised language for the sound systems, but strike this administrative briefing.
Because it's included here.
Included here, exactly.
Okay, I'm sorry, Larry. I
No, you're fine.
didn't read that.
Simra. Oh, sorry. Please.
And
continue.
then I have a comment here. And it's something that I have mentioned to the mayor and to the city administrator, and that I did, I think, bring up in a council meeting at 1.2. I would like for Lake Forest Park to start a new habit of regular reports from department heads, not just at budget time, but throughout the year, so that we can keep track of things like the progress of major projects, the numbers of permits that are being issued, any major, we get a good report from the police department about what's going on, but we don't get it from the other departments, from planning and from public works and even from this city clerk. So I think it would be a good thing for the citizens and the council to actually have more regular reports. And so I wonder if we can write that into the governance manual, whether the council would agree that that is a beneficial thing for the city. I don't intend it to be overly burdensome on staff. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't have to be a written report. It could just simply be getting up and giving us a few numbers now and then, or letting us know that things are coming along fine, or what have you, but just so that we feel more in touch with what is going on in the departments.
Thank you, Philippa. On point, if I may, really quickly, we had a conversation about this a while ago. This is far less about accountability and more about celebrating successes of the teams and trying to highlight what's going on. Some, just a couple, 3 or 4 things. This is what these great successes that Public Works has had, the PD's had, et cetera. And it helps all of us kind of move forward with the public relative to the progress and things we have. Mr. Lebo, John.
Several things here. So for example, under 4.2, I would simplify that just basically to say that administrative staff needs to appear when there are subjects that they need to be presenting or involved in. rather than talk about whether they may sit in their office or not. I think we just simplify and say the expectation is the administrative staff is present when needed. I would also leave the administrative staff presentations and briefings as a separate item because I think it enhances what we're trying to do rather than the attendance of the staff.
Thank you. Again, if you have specific edits, I really appreciate there's a lot of marginal edits here. Incorporated.
And Tom,
Please.
I'm going to push back a little bit on you on the celebratory issue.
Okay.
There are times when, as a council and a community, we need to know the challenges that are being faced by our departments,
Yeah.
not just the good times.
The happiness.
Because we have challenges, and if we don't hear about them and the community doesn't know about them, then we don't get to solve problems when we need to. So I think it's very important that and then the other reason that I would really look for a little bit more reporting from departments is there are times when this council, when the council makes changes to how we do things, you know, adopts new ordinances, tries to make improvements. And oftentimes we don't know if it worked because we never hear back. So that for me is one of the most important things too. It's not, you know, accountability, are you doing your job, but did our work actually make the improvement that we hoped? Are there being more ADUs built? I don't have a clue, but yet we passed that 2 years ago. So I really want to know more about that.
Excellent. Thank you. And as always,
Quarterly is fine.
As always, I appreciate pushback. I really do. It's a great discussion.
So I also support having quarterly reports. And so imagine if we had a website that had a dashboard, much of this material would already be available. But most agencies, at least the larger ones that I've been involved with, monthly is quite typical. So quarterly would seem to be reasonable.
Thank you, John. Any other thoughts on that? I do appreciate that, everyone. And
If I
please.
I think I would also like make it clear that it doesn't have to all be in the same night. That these can be staggered out, you know, so that it's not a burden for you all and it's not necessarily a burden for us to sit through a lot. So just a little bit more respectful of all of our times. So.
Thank you, Samara. And I actually, on point, I tried very hard to figure out a way to write into the governance manual that we should have our agendas so that we didn't have multiple meetings from outside our community. These, you know, regional presentations that are going, which we enjoy very much, but more than one or two at a night tends to push us into the later hours of the night. So I'll leave it there. Let's move on to the next page. Samara.
I'm not 100% sure where and for this might be useful, but do we want to document that council meetings can be held hybrid going forward? Is that further down?
Is that farther down?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
then we'll get there.
Yeah, you're getting. Colleagues, any thought about, well, special council meetings that's only it's under the RCWs. We hopefully everybody's versed in where that is going. I mean, where the important part of that. And then let's see. So I am not sure why recycled products got deleted. That's just weird. Okay, well, we'll figure that out. That's another one that's probably it doesn't have anything attributions there. Okay, so remote attendance in council meetings. And I will be the first person to say that this is shamelessly adopted from a couple of our neighbors and edited down for clarity. There's a bunch of different things in here, and I would love your thoughts. Mr. Lebo.
I would reduce it down to council are encouraged to attend in person and hybrid remote is an option. That would be my extent of it. I'm sorry. There are some days when I realize I cannot get here on time, and so I need to do a remote. And so to say that I have to tell somebody a day in advance and only under extraordinary circumstances, I think we should just recognize that the world has changed and that remote hybrid meetings are a part of the way we can and should conduct our meetings. And so to say otherwise, I don't think we should. So I would just edit it all down to say in-person is encouraged and we will conduct hybrid meetings. And that we don't need to say that you have to have this level of equipment, that you have to give somebody advance notice, that if you drop off for whatever reasons, you know, if you're remote, except for challenges on this end of the equipment, the person who's remote needs to have the appropriate equipment.
I agree with John. I think we can shorten this down to just the nuts and bolts of meetings will be hybrid. It's preferred that you attend in person. If you can't attend, who should you notify? So let the deputy mayor know, let the city clerk know. But I don't think we have to, since it's sort of a no questions asked policy, if someone's not able to make it, I don't think we need to have all these extra rules.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Summer, please.
I'd like us to add, pardon everyone, but the importance of hybrid for access to the community, to have access to our sessions as well, to recognize that that's an important component of having hybrid meetings. So it's not just, I don't want it to sound like it's just so council members can stay home, or, you know, more often it's remoting in from vacations. But I'd like to acknowledge that it's an important component for our community and staff members to be able to attend when in person is challenging.
Just to be clear, though, our meetings are always streamed, whether or not
Yeah.
anybody is remote.
But you
Yeah.
don't get public comment through the streaming.
Ah, okay.
So you don't actually get engagement with the public unless we're hybrid.
Point taken. Thank you.
And we kind of passed over the recycled products because it seems obvious, but I think, I know, it's kind of funny. I think the intent here was when we were all getting giant paper packets. And we wanted to make sure,
Absolutely.
again, the historical context of that. I think that perhaps something that's again more generic that you know, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but you know, items provided for council will be compostable. We will reduce where possible, recycle where possible, but just sort of be a little bit more generic and more simply in the sense that we're trying to lighten our footprint
Sure.
on the world. So
Yeah, that was exactly the spirit of the original. It's not in it didn't carry over from the merge, but again, we have a very strong ethic about that, and the city has a policy. So, I mean, we should continue it on with our governance manual. So let's see. Yes.
So I'm just scanning because I have to say that I was in agreement with the public comment that we heard at the beginning of this meeting about the fact that the documents that are the documents attached to the agenda do need to be we need to make sure that any documents that the council will be using in the meeting are also available to the public via the website. So I don't know whether that is something that should be in this particular section or some other section, but let's try to get it in.
That's a great point. Let's make sure. So Samara, please
and
go
Tom,
ahead.
if you could add any, especially council presented like presentations be included in that. And so even if they're not, I know that there's been a couple presentations that I haven't been able to find after. I mean, I could go into the meeting and watch the video, but it's a PowerPoint. I should be able to have access to just flipping through the PowerPoint. So those should also be part of that.
John.
Yeah.
It would be nice if, just as we get the materials early, we get the presentations early. And for staff presentations, it wouldn't include outside third parties, but I do work for an agency where we do have to provide presentations along with the other staff reports ahead of the meeting. So you're not trying to digest the presentation at the meeting. And that would also go to, that material would also be available on the web. So the challenge, of course, is always that you have to prepare the material in advance, but if you have, the deadline is a deadline. So whether it's Thursday or the Friday preceding, it's still the same.
I would appreciate the extra time to digest.
Please go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll chime in a second.
Well, so reality bites on this one. Because I know full well that some of the work that the staff prepares for us, they don't get to it, they can't get to it until a day or so before the meeting. So it's not going to meet that, you know, or the day of the meeting. So it's not going to meet the Friday before deadline. But as long as it's available on the website, I'm okay with that. I'm thinking particularly of the presentations. So I don't want to make this overly burdensome for our very lean staff, who are all of whom are wearing many hats. I'm just not sure that the reality that reality will allow that.
I work in an organization where you have to do that. And so whether the deadline is next Thursday or this Friday, it's still a deadline. And so you just work towards whatever deadline you have. And if you're allowed to go to Thursday, then you will work till Thursday.
I'm kind of in the middle, having been there, you know, many times of, you know, walking into a board meeting, having to, somebody says, here's my slides, and having to slot them into a presentation I have to give in front of a bunch of people, which is unfortunate and not happy. I agree. I totally understand your sentiment as well as yours, John. I'm wondering if we could put in language here that says that's not necessarily binding, but is encouraging. You know, let's try to do the best that they can in terms of time frame. Because I agree with you, Philip, that we are short-staffed and we have things that we have to. So let's find some. We can find some middle ground there on, you know, encouraging, strong encouragement to get it to us if at all possible. I do find it sometimes challenging as well that little bit related, but not directly related to staff. Sometimes we get presentations from outside agencies and then we don't get copies of their slides, and that's it's a little challenging because they scroll through them very quickly, some numbers and everything else, and it's not necessarily any criticism of anybody here. It's just sometimes they don't send them and we have to ask for them. So okay, so is everybody comfortable with sort of a middle ground, encourage staff to provide if at all possible?
I'd appreciate if you bookmark this, because the person who really would be the best to consult about this is our city administrator. And I think he will have views on this. And I think, you know, I understand why you guys want it, and I understand what we have as staff. So just put a mark that we need to talk to Phil so we can get this dialed in right for you guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor.
I think adding some language that presentations provided prior to, you know, the meeting will allow council to be more efficient and engaged and sort of, you know, and timely in our response, you know, so just kind of bring our side to it. And then
Yeah.
again, the public, and it allows the public
Yeah.
the opportunity to digest it prior to presentation. So that halfway in between, let's definitely list why it's important, and then we can work with Phil on the details.
So I, just for the record, I'm 3/4 of the way towards John's position on this, because I think about like the chief's presentation on Thursday. Great presentation. We could have celebrated some more of that if we'd had in advance, chances to look at it. So thank you,
And
everybody.
I think definitely strong language that any presentations that are provided at council sessions must be publicly published on the website by a certain date after the session. I think that's an easier ask, because they should have the PowerPoint or whatever. And I think it's just part of updating the agenda packet, possibly, though I could be completely off on that. We'll see what Phil says.
I think Matt does an excellent job of trying to get everything in there as long as he has access to them. So I know he does. Let's go on to Article 5. If nobody has, I mean, again, we're moving through this pretty quickly, but again, this is the first.
So there
Sorry.
was one more under council committees. I added a paragraph, just trying to distinguish between the difference between committee of the whole versus work sessions.
What page and?
Where are you?
Where are you?
Yeah, page 21.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did
No, you got
I know.
20, so go to 21.
Hang on a second.
But did we get through all the?
Yeah, no, I'm making sure we did I?
I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry. I scrolled down too far here on my computer. I'm ahead of myself. So
Okay.
let's make sure that, oh my gosh. This is an example of, if you look at page 20, example of the merge problem. RCWs are stricken 3 times. Yes. Larry, let's absolutely talk about this here. Where are we? So next page. Okay, yes, the committee of the whole. Yes, under E, number, well, it's just second item under number, under E. Would you like to describe what your thoughts are there?
Yeah, this paragraph, I remember early on last year, Tom had sent a kind of a flow chart for how we go about crafting an ordinance. And so incorporating that language that if any council member has something they're passionate about, get a second person on board, and then arrange for that to be presented at an upcoming meeting.
And I thank you for that. I think that it embodies what I was trying to do. I really appreciate that. One of the things I did want to recognize, someplace in here, as I recall, there's language that says that a council member may introduce something to the agenda right before the meeting and whatever else, but that was way prior to a bunch of the changes that we made. And I look for it, and we'll find it here probably shortly, but I want to make sure that it's understandable that unless it's an emergency, staff has very specific deadlines in terms of adding things to the agenda. And they have a system that Matt has very adeptly put into practice, and they go through the system, and they have to get their items into the system well in advance of the council meetings. And so we want to make sure that we're cognizant of the administration's needs and staff's workflows. At the same time, unless it's an emergency, we can certainly pivot if we have to.
We do generally have the other business section. And
Sure.
I think that may have been in the intent, is to add your other business at the agenda approval voting piece to get it into the agenda if you've got other business.
That's a great point, Samara.
The
And
timing.
maybe what the intent was back in 2013, when this was written, was to, it's sort of early and often, rather than to blindside staff and the administration by something coming up, if you can possibly do that. None of us like to drop it on the dais and try to move something forward. That was a practice that happened, in an ice age ago. Thank you very much. But I want to make sure that we're all respectful of each other and how the, we move forward. Does that make sense?
I had a comment on this page too, which is that on or not a comment, but I wanted to open a discussion here on item E. So council committees. I have not actually been a liaison to a committee here because I've handled so many of the outside ones, but are they recorded or streamed? And if documents are shared at council committees, are they all on the website? The planning commission I know is, but what about the others? Is the tree board? It's streamed?
It's recorded. It's not streamed though.
Yeah.
Is it streamed?
The tree board is recorded on Zoom. Actually, I'm not sure if it's live streamed or not.
No. The only thing that's live streamed right now is the city council meetings. So everything else,
The business meeting specifically?
this
Matt?
meeting right now is being streamed on a cable channel.
Okay. So the cows, the work sessions, and the business meetings.
Yes.
Thank you.
And everything else is recorded and uploaded and attached, and then it's posted on our website.
How about planning commission?
It's recorded and joined and posted to our website.
Okay,
So it's actually recorded in Zoom and then uploaded into YouTube and then linked to our agenda. So everything, if you go to our website and look at the agendas of meetings, you'll see it.
okay.
If you want me to pull it up, I can pull it up.
No, you're fine. Thank you, Matt. And just for those of you out there and on the internet, that's our clerk, Matt McLean, in the background here, he's the wizard behind the curtain. So thank you, Matt. Okay, so that's important to.
Question as we go through kind of, as we're talking about this. B is the responsibility of the chair of the committee to notify the city clerk of the date, time, place of any council committee meeting and to provide a committee agenda. Is it typically the chair of planning commission, chair of the tree board? Or is this only talking about specifically city council?
Let's see.
Trying to make sure, because it's under council committee, so I'm assuming that's essentially you,
Yeah, it would be under council committees. Yeah.
but or the chair of the budget and finance committee if it's not the same as.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually, from the standpoint of,
So things like the planning commission, tree board, those are in Article 7 under commissions. So 7.4.
but there's, you have, Summer, you raise a good point here that we need to modify this to work with the workflow of the staff. Because some of the deadlines have changed considerably. Sometimes it was like last minute, other times, so chair of the committee to. Yep. Mayor will work with the chair of each committee to assign staff to support committee deliberations. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. I think.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Samara. That's a good point. So hold on, let me make a note here. Workflow. Deadlines. You had a question?
No.
Okay. All right, so, and we already talked about Mr. Goldman's, Larry's comments about committee of the whole. The only addition was, this is a question you raised, Simra, a while ago. The chair is elected on a biannual basis at council organizational meeting. It's specified in another place, but delineating here makes sense. If there's no changes there, let's move on to page 23, please. Okay, so this is important. Again, this is still under the way this is printed is a little challenging because it falls under budget and finance. So we're carrying over here on page 23, it's still budget and finance. So the chair and the committee and, I'm sorry, or his or her designee on the committee will review and recommend the approval of warrants, checks or warrants drawn on behalf of the city on a biweekly basis or as needed, except for payroll. So I added the words review and recommend because I've been doing this for a long time and it made sense from the language standpoint, and also bi-weekly as well as an as needed basis, because sometimes things get bound up and then they come in batches and we have to deal with it so we don't slow down the staff. Question.
Just a generic question to work on his, her, maybe changing to they, to their,
Oh,
just
sure.
as a general
Yeah.
comment through here so that we're
Yeah, of course.
a little more inclusive and yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and so then this biweekly basis is other than the council approving the information that we get at the consent calendar. It has already been through the budget and finance review process before it hits the consent calendar. Is that a true statement?
That's a true statement.
Good.
Thank you
Okay.
very much. And
Just
I want
wanted to
to
clarify.
reach out to our director of finance, Lindsay, about this. Does that language work for you on a biweekly basis or as needed? Because I want to make sure it's clear
Yes.
that
Mhm.
there are times where it's not necessarily bi-weekly. It might be 2 weeks in a row. It might be, as whatever requires to keep the city moving forward.
Functioning.
So,
Yeah. This
okay.
language absolutely works.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. To your language here, and I added a little bit to the end.
Yeah, just kind of codifying because the Budget and Finance Committee has been gracious enough to allow Philip, myself and the others to attend and to contribute. So just kind of writing it down that we can attend, our feedback will be welcomed, or I think you added welcomed, but that we're not voting members.
Yeah. Excuse me. Thank you very much for this, Larry, for including this. So the language is the remaining council members are welcome to attend the committee and their input will be solicited and welcomed. However, they will not be permitted to vote on budget and finance committee related matters with the exception of consideration of the mayor's biennial budget. And this question arose a while ago, and without not playing an attorney on TV, which would get me into all sorts of trouble. I just want to say that previous practices we want to make sure that we're being careful about what is acceptable. So that's one of the reasons why this previous vote was not an effort to consolidate down to 3 people. It's that the state statutes require us to make discrete separation of what a committee is and what it's not. And so as we have delineated that the Budget and Finance Committee becomes a committee of the whole when the budget season kicks off on the biannual budget, then at that point, all the members become members of the council become voting members and can contribute their vote as well as their input. So
I think this is fine, although I would strike after vote period and strike on budget and finance committee related matters, to the point that if you're not on the budget committee, you're not a voting member. And to the other point, the mayor's budget is in fact voted on by the council.
it is, but splitting hairs here for a second, the decisions that are made, it's voted by the council, but the decisions and the budget is referred from budget and finance to the whole council. So, see what I'm saying?
Right, but you have a budget and finance committee that's just 3 members. So if you have another committee or other process that includes all members, then it's not the budget and finance committee. It's something else. Otherwise, you're mixing. You're saying you're a 3-member committee, but you also are a 7-member committee.
Now we're gonna get into playing lawyer on TV, so we
Yeah.
gotta be careful here.
So the original language is there.
Yes,
Um,
good, great point, John.
so the original language is still here. And I think it's pretty clear. It says for purposes of considering the mayor's proposed biennial and interim budget and recommending a biennial interim budget, all 7 council members shall be members of the committee. That's actually in our governance manual already. And that's how the practice that we've used.
Agreed, but then you wouldn't have to restate that in this previous.
That's
statement.
what
redundant, it's
I'm
redundant.
saying. I don't believe we need that new paragraph, to be honest with you, Larry.
I want to be clear, though. The intent is for the 7-member council to be able to engage in deliberations of the budget. But if we were to have a discrete budget and finance specific topic that we would normally take outside of budget season, but had to address it during budget season, unrelated to the budget, would that then be voted on by the original 3 members in
No.
order to maintain the separation of functions as required? And then we can ask Kim on this. I think this is just, I'm just bringing up an idea
Yeah.
that we need to have delved into further. And I think we may end up with a budget or like a budget deliberation committee type designation to help us differentiate those 2 legally.
Thank you. Larry.
Oh, Phil, I believe.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, I apologize.
So thinking about our budget process last year, were any actual votes taken during a budget and finance committee meeting? Because it seems like those were all deliberations. And the only votes that were taken were in a proper council meeting. And so I wonder, could we just simplify the whole process and say something like, during budget season, all council members are especially encouraged to attend all budget and finance committee meetings?
Thank you, Larry. In all the budget and finance meetings, it has been the practice of myself and my predecessor to encourage all the council members to be part of the mix. And I would say that this language here needs to be referred to our legal team to make sure that we have a clear understanding, because this starts getting us into a place. John brings up a really good question. Is it forming a new committee by saying it's suddenly all the members of, and so maybe what we're saying is that during the budget and finance season, nothing changes. It's just that when it comes down to an actual decision, a raise of the hand, there are very explicit parameters that are state statute mandated. I suspect that's the case. So if it's okay with you all, let me get with Kim on this, because I want to make sure that we're very careful, because I think the spirit of this, of course, was inclusiveness, to make sure that everybody was part of the mix. And I applaud my friend John, who led us in with great skills and consideration, kindness for all those years in budget and finance. And I think there was one unintended consequence, and that was that everybody sitting at the table is a challenge from state statute point. And that's why I had to say, unfortunately, folks, we have to, it's not the big kids and little kids table. It's not like that. Although Phil and I had lots of jokes about us sitting at card tables as kids, but it's really important for us to make sure that we're on straight and level when it comes to the state statutes and legal requirements. So let's bookmark this for Kim's team. And again, I want to, this document, unless it's really something super onerous, I don't want to burden legal team with this, the very specific things. They're going to review it in the aggregate at the end before we approve it, because that's essential. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Where are we now? We're on
So,
communications.
yeah, the communications committee has been defunct for several years. And so I think this just needs to come out.
Yep.
it was formed in a period when the city's website was under construction, shall we say? And clear kind of policies around the issuance of a city newsletter and things like that were not in place. And so those are now in place, and I feel pretty good about that. The only thing that I think we've sort of lost, and I think it's really more due to the pandemic than anything else, was to actually hold, citizen town halls now and then. But I think that that's something that the whole council really should be involved in discussing and making a decision about anyway. It's not just necessarily just a couple people, the communications committee job. So I still think that we just strike 3 here with the communications committee.
Well, thank guard.
Well, and now I just want to say that our deputy city clerk has taken on so much of that communication, is doing a great job. So
Yep.
I'm like really, really happy that she's doing that, and I don't feel the need to oversee it.
Just one item that's being struck there that we may want to consider how to reintroduce is city council press releases and, our piece in the newsletter, and just identifying the ownership of that piece of communication. Not necessarily obviously as part of a committee, but simply it's just, let's not lose
Yep.
track of that.
Excellent.
And then I can see we've added the legislative steering committee. And I know there's reference.
Hold on, stay on communications for a
Oh,
second.
sure.
That's a great idea. We don't want to lose that thread there. I think that's really essential, actually. We not replacing the communications committee, striking that, and then the addition of a policy that talks about council communications in that regard. I think that's really important. Thank you for bringing it up. Now, onwards. Okay.
And I believe it's mentioned elsewhere in this, but the agenda committee. And I think since it's kind of a committee, and it's kind of this blended committee with the staff, and it's under another section, but perhaps referencing it here to the other, referencing the other section here if someone's looking for what our committees are. So maybe when we get to that point, I think it was under stuff around the chair anyways.
Okay.
We do call it a committee in
That's
that
true.
section. So just for continuity.
Yeah, that does actually make sense. Thank you
Okay.
for that.
And as someone who's not yet been on the legislative steering committee, I'm not quite sure what it is. So I think definitely I could use
Sure.
some more description on there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Sessions like spot on.
Yeah, mainly because I didn't understand this at first and I had to be taught what the difference was between tonight's committee of the whole versus the early Thursday work session. And so just clarifying that for future council members.
I very much appreciate that. Thoughts, anyone? Summer?
Just perhaps as I read the language here, policy proposals or additional information, because it's not just a place for proposals, but it's also kind of a place for ongoing information around
Yeah, okay.
work
Yeah,
that
you
we've
bet.
asked them to do.
And- Okay.
Just
That's a
more
great-
generic language, I think. Just a quick thought, because it lists that they will be held at a particular time at City Hall, which, they will. But they could also be hybrid and so forth. So if there's a way we can just reference it back to how the other council, or just strike that because it's in Article 4 where we've already identified that we can have hybrid meetings and it would just fall under that umbrella.
Fair enough. And on point, I actually struck this and I was like, I don't know why they put this in here originally, so I left it in for your consideration. Well, there you go. So there's consideration. I have no problem striking that and revising the language. Honestly, the council work sessions, by state statute, we have to adopt, as I understand it, and Kim would tell me if I'm incorrect here, that we have to set specific times for meetings. Full stop. It's the law. And I'm not sure exactly where it has to be set, and it's part of the mix. I think that's why it was included here. So let me preface my response, or postscript my response by saying I need to check with our legal team.
Yeah, I'm just looking at how our agenda reads. It says meeting location in person and virtual /Zoom with the City Hall's address. So I think we could stay in consistency with that. And then further, I have a comment about the work session agenda. And I know historically we have been skipping the Pledge of Allegiance because the work session occurs right before a business meeting. And we've been deferring the Pledge of Allegiance to the business meeting pretty typically. Mayor, it makes a lot of sense to me the way that you've run those work sessions. So I would I would just strike it
I'm
here.
happy to strike it because it's always before. Let's remove that. Thank you for catching that.
And then just so we know, the kind of the last work session we had, it had the call to order, it had the adoption of the agenda. It had council discussion topic, and then it adjourned, and then it has future schedule below. So I don't know if we want to kind of tighten the language up to what we currently present in our
Yeah,
agenda, just as a general rule, look at that.
The confirmation review calendar is incorrect. That's incorrect. It should be a council discussion.
Topics.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or staff presentations and.
Yep.
candidates, that
Yeah, well, we
provide-
can find language here
Yeah.
that makes sense. So. And actually, I'll defer to our city clerk in the future on this one. He can describe what's the best way to approach this because yes, I think that actually on point, that's one of the ones, the confirmation review calendar was one of the things that went back to the previous commission structure and the previous lot more variegated meetings that were split off into various things. And so staff presentation.
And
Please.
should we also note that the work session is chaired by the mayor, whereas the
Mhm.
cow is chaired by the deputy mayor? And
Yep.
I don't know, we have that in there.
Let's see, schedule work sessions.
It does not say.
Okay, yeah, it's chaired by the mayor, of course. Great.
Whereas committee of the whole is chaired by the deputy mayor.
I think that's in there.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Where are we?
The council chair shall chair the committee.
Yeah.
It says that.
Yeah.
It goes back. Does not say that
Uh,
for work sessions.
Okay, chaired by mayor, that's important. Okay, good, we're getting this tighter. And by the way, it goes without saying, look, actually, this is probably, let's see, where are we? That's probably a good place for us to pause.
Take up the second half next.
Yeah,
time.
because it's gonna go on, well, we're still on meetings and it keeps going on and on and on.
Let's say the second half. I missed.
Yeah, we're gonna continue on. This is pretty, it starts getting a little bit meaty here. Tracy.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor. And I'm just wondering, is there a reason to be so prescriptive about the agenda since in the council, or sorry, committee of the whole, it doesn't actually state an agenda? And that the work session it does, is there a reason to have agenda items at all?
Again, this is one of the, that's a great question and thank you, because those of us have been here, rattling around for a while, we kind of forget. Actually, this is a relic of the old days, honestly, and I'm quite comfortable. The administration and the council works so cooperatively on various things. It does not have to be this prescriptive. And so if you all would rather have have it in a place that's sort of generic and amenable to, getting things done, I'm, Philippa.
So I understand what you're saying, but let us realize too that part of what we do here is to prepare a guide for the potential of a real wholesale turnover of a council. How do they conduct business and keep going if there's no institutional memory? So this is actually codifying our institutional memory. So I think there's some reason to be a little prescriptive, but not to make it so that it hamstrings, that it doesn't give some flexibility for responding to circumstances. But one of the things that again, those who's been around a little bit of time, we know other cities where there's been a wholesale change of council, and they really struggle if they don't have some kind of guidance as to how to get on with business. And I would just like to be responsible to the future by giving as clear a document as we can to help future councils do the right thing.
Sage advice. Thank you, Philippa. And actually on point too, we have heard recently that some councils who have had challenges have struggled even to create their own rules because they don't have any rules to create the rules. So I appreciate your voice of reason there. You had a comment.
I was just gonna suggest, I know we've hit time, but if we'd like to finish out B and C so we can close out 4.7, so we at least don't end in the middle of a
Let's go there.
topic. Is that
Thank
okay,
you.
council?
Sure, let's do that. B, thoughts about this? I think Larry, you had a comment. Let's see.
Just that I don't think we should try to micromanage meetings to say this topic's going to be 10 minutes long. That we don't actually do that, and I think it works perfectly fine.
Works for me. Any thoughts? Can we micromanage the people that come and present to us? Can we say? I see nodding all out there in the audience. Thank you, public and staff. I'm going for a 10 slide maximum. How about that? Simra.
Typically, the agendas don't cover this information, but the cover letters of the topics of whatever they're presenting oftentimes do, at least in business meetings. We're talking about work session here. So I don't generally get this information when we do work sessions. This seems to be something we haven't been following specifically for work sessions, but we've, it's just, for instance, this is draft ordinance and it listed the ordinance number, and that's all the information we get on the agenda. So we get more information when you click through to the agenda item. So perhaps this is agenda items should include this information, not necessarily the agenda itself.
Fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, I think part of it is to Philippa's point about making sure we're prescriptive enough that if we're all not here at some point, which we all will not be here, that there's a little bit of guidance here for people to work off of and give them an opportunity to focus more on the policy making rather than the framework. And I think it's important to do that. I think just on your thought, Simra, about some of the things that we're not necessarily doing, I don't think it's, unless it's explicitly delineated that it has to happen. I think it's okay for us to say, this is a nice to have. There's some things that we absolutely need to have for sure. So it's sort of the shalls and you will kind of thing in the legalese. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we don't, if it's in here and it's a dinosaur that has never been used, let's call it out, please, everybody. And if it's something that needs to be added so that we have additional clarity and understanding, then let's definitively put it into the mix. Tracy.
So would it be appropriate to put in into an appendix or something the template that the city clerk uses to generate these agendas, since that would pretty much cover basically a lot of these specific items that we've been talking about?
That's an interesting thought, because then my mind starts going, and I was thinking about the fact that then if we had that actually adopted as a separate resolution, then you could refer it from here. Then you wouldn't have to revisit this each time you wanted to change a series of things. I mean, again, when it comes to the agendas, you can modify them. You can do all those things under state statute, and Matt can speak much more knowledgeably about that. But let's put it this way. Matt's his head is probably spinning back there, or maybe popped off. Let's think about what we'll have a conversation with Matt and the team and see what makes sense in that regard, so that we can not reinvent the wheel this has been 7 years, right? So, but again, maybe there's some things in terms of the agendas, in the actual structure of the agendas, that makes sense from the clerk's side, that help us have more efficient meetings. So thank you for that, Tracy. You're at 7:35. You were sounding thoughtful.
Yeah, I really do think that this whole business about, you know, I have to admit, I hadn't turned the page when I made my earlier comments. And then I turned the page and I saw this agendas will list the following elements for each council discussion topic. That's too much. That's too much
Yeah,
managing. I don't like this section at all, to be perfectly honest with you. So
yeah, it seems like it was
I just
pasted in
wanted to-
there.
Yeah. I mean,
right,
I
let's-
just wanted to kind of come back and say that that's too much. And I think that needs a good rewrite, and I'd be willing to work on
Okay.
that section. And I just, it's not necessary, all that stuff.
Thank you for that. All right, colleagues.
Just want to close out youth commissions and then we'll.
Oh,
move
yeah,
on with
yeah,
C.
let's finish on C. Board commissions and youth council engagement with, so I guess, Larry, this is your comment.
Yeah,
Please.
I don't know what the youth council is. And is that a relic or is it?
No, it was actually pretty strong.
It was really strong. Yeah. No, Mayor, please. No, you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really a valuable thing and I'm really hoping we bring it back. So Corey was involved. We did events. We'd bring in guest speakers. Yeah, I will. That's not a relic. That's hopefully gonna come back. So. we'll work
What's
on
the
that.
status of the youth court?
There's a meeting, right?
Are they meeting?
They were active. In fact, since the new judge has been here, she's kept them active and.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes.
So if you haven't met with some of those people, young people, they're extraordinarily articulate and thoughtful, and things that involve, I'm speaking, does everybody know what the youth court is? Okay, so, sort of. Okay, well then I won't sell you on it. This is a fantastic part of our community, and it's very important.
So this is actually, this C is something that we haven't really been doing, but I actually like it. And I wish we would make that offer to some of our groups, that they could come in and talk to us at the work session. The work session is a kind of a short meeting though. And you know,
Yeah, the language here is a little convoluted also. I appreciate that very much. We used to get briefings from the youth court on an annual basis, which was quite, and the youth council. Tracy?
Just my concern was, why is it here? Because structurally, it seems like it should be somewhere else. It's part of council work sessions.
Yeah, it's, if, you know, this is chaired by the mayor. Those are his groups. They talk to the mayor. I don't see why necessarily it needs to be in our space here. I think we can perhaps just say we're open to additional presentations as requested to be added to the agenda. It's just kind of a general catch-all.
I think it's probably worth us kind of deciding that someone from the Climate Action Committee wants to give us a presentation. Is that at a regular council meeting, a work session, or a cow? Like, where does that belong?
Great question. And you know, I'm finally my memory is coming back here. I remember why this was written this way. It was very specific, demonstrative about the work sessions during a difficult time. And so I think that we really should think about a sort of a whole scale rewriting of, you know, what this looks like. Because again, to Vice Chair Cassover's point about, you know, being sort of prescriptive about going forward, or not providing guidance and goal posts for future council members. We also want to eliminate some of the things of the past that don't necessarily make sense. And this doesn't make sense to me as I look at it holistically. Does that resonate with you all? And Mayor? You bet. Any other
Deputy Mayor,
thoughts?
Can I make one point about that section?
Yeah.
That's actually a joint meeting. So even though you put it in the work session, it would actually be agenda size as a joint meeting.
Joint meeting, okay. So thank you, Matt. And
Oh,
we'll,
a joint meeting with the commission?
Yeah. With
Got
a
it, thank
specific board and commission,
All right, thank you.
Because it'd be posted to both there and our
right?
world.
Yep.
So perhaps there's just a joint meeting section that we need to make, because that joint meeting has happened at work sessions, it's happened at council meetings, probably cows. So I think maybe we just highlight that as its own line item.
makes sense. Thank you, Matt.
It does make sense to me that commissions, that their sort of line of communication is up through the city administration. So that's why it would need to be at the work session rather than the cow, because they don't report to you as the deputy mayor, they
Absolutely.
report to the mayor. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and it also makes sense too, because they're talking about work and interactions about what is getting done, as opposed, and there are times where they come to us in a council meeting and give us, you know, hey, we got this grant, or lots of other things, is celebrating kinds of things. But I think from a work session standpoint, kind of makes some sense to, we can hone this in and make the language more appropriate.
Well, and I'm thinking we had the school board joint meeting, which is an outside entity. So I think
Right.
having a joint meeting definition and how we handle those would be
Right.
useful. They may slot in at work sessions, they may be separate entities.
Yes, and the last thing I would just say about that, I know under state statute, and Matt will probably correct me later, but I know under state statute, work sessions have very specific parameters, so we'll sort that out. Colleagues, anything else? I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. We're 15 minutes over, and any last thoughts? And then the mayor had a comment.
Just a follow-up timeline as to, I know you've got a lot of notes, but maybe getting the clarified one with the
You bet.
deletions kind of fixed. Is that something that we can expect to in a
You bet.
short
Let's
time?
let the mayor
Okay.
make his comment, and then we'll talk about next steps. Jeff?
Just real quick, I was in the room when we wrote this originally. I know the climate of City Hall when we wrote it originally. I'm very happy to know that no two council members like Tom and I will ever be treated again like we were our first 2 years. It was pretty phenomenal what it was like back then, and we were very excluded from everything. It was a different world, and I'm really proud of this document, even though it was a real pain. But if everybody knew why this was written exactly and what it has done for the city, this is a fantastic thing. And exactly like you were saying, we need to carry this on, because I know that I was very serious about this, because I never thought anybody should be treated the way we were. And it was not good. So someday maybe we can write a book, but thank you, Tom, because we had a lot going with this. But I remember sitting downstairs in the forest room talking about every single one of these. This has been kind of a light bulb on your head, and you remembers all that we've gone through to get to this point. Just thanks for all your work you're putting into it. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Mayor. Tracy?
Comment about that. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for providing the historical context. It's always said that a set of human rules is always about a fight. And the fact is that if you didn't know what the fight was, some of the rules may not make sense, but I do appreciate the historical context you guys bring to it. So thanks for working on it.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Mayor. It's funny because as we're sitting here going through this document, I'm remembering, as you saw me having these sort of, oh gosh, it's sort of, my amnesia, the cloud is lifting. Part of it's probably compensating to try to put it away from my mind, because it was not a happy thing. But war stories aside, pun not intended at all. It was a different time, and it illustrates the point that we need to make sure, as Vice Chair Cassover said, that we do have a framework in place that's not overly burdensome to the administration or to the council, but at the same time, it's reflective of the values that we all, the various values we bring to the table, divergent values, and that we are, trying to set the next people for the next, this has stood the test of time for quite a while, basically a decade. I mean, there have been revisions, but hopefully it can stand the test of time for more than that going forward. So I'll leave it there unless there's anything else for the good of the order. And we already had citizen comments, so I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.